It's an informal session. We got it running till about 12 o'clock and hopefully we'll have you out all up on time. Depends how chatter goes. The subject is sharing experiences and advice with learning behaviour. And what I'm going to do, as I usually do, is just let everyone introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with your end.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm a special needs advisor based in the London Borough of Redbridge. I've been doing this for a really long time. I was 6 foot when I started, I'm now 4'10", and I'm really not joking. You'll see my 6 foot colleague with me at lunchtime and you'll realise what's happened to me. My passion is neurology, and Duchenne's is a real passion of mine. I'm one of the 20 PD ambassadors funded by the DFE because I'm absolutely passionate that every school should have the best physical disability advice. We worry about autism and we worry about speech and language, but often physical disability, and often when it's high need and low incidence like Duchenne's, it gets forgotten. So I'm a bit passionate. I'm doing a session after this on EHCs, but I've been doing it a long time, and we have exemplary practice where we are, and I'm very proud of it. I know that isn't the case for everybody else, so I'm here today to try and give you questions to go back to schools and colleges and settings to say, what does that look like for my child? I'm trying to give you ideas to how to ask the right questions. So that's who I am. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Marlene. I've got a 19-year-old son with Duchenne. When he was 3, he was diagnosed as being autistic, which severely delayed him getting a diagnosis of Duchenne because the doctors just kept saying he's autistic and nobody would listen. So for the last sort of 19 years we've been just struggling, just trying to get the best we can for our son.
I'm Victoria Young. I'm the Community Fundraising and Support Officer at Action Duchenne. I'm also mum to Dougie, who's 9 and lives with Duchenne, and Ali, who's 5. The first signs, Dougie was only diagnosed 2 years ago, but actually the first things that were recognised in him was his learning and behaviour side of things. So I'm just here to share my experience.
Gary, I think I've met most people in here. My son's Cormac, diagnosed with autism 2 days ago, but no great shakes there, and we knew that was coming. ADHD, we got diagnosed about 1.5 years ago during lockdown when I had a mental breakdown. But we've been fighting for that diagnosis for about 8 years now, and so a lot of lived experience. And I was just saying to James, I'm a bit of a super fan of James as well. That when you have the behavioural aspects, that the Duchenne part is kind of secondary, right? Because you're having to live with the day-to-day outbursts and breakdowns and all the other stuff. So you don't really have time for Duchenne. You've got to deal with the why is he hit his brother, or why is he trashed the school classroom, etc. So I've seen James's stuff before, but obviously his advice, and David's yesterday obviously is excellent.
And I'm James Poisky. I am a pediatric neuropsychologist, but I think I mentioned this earlier. If you met my kids, you'd know I don't know what I'm talking about at all. My wife is a much better parent than I am. But yeah, my son, Joel, he's 20. He has Duchenne. And my daughter, Hallie, she's 16. Oh my gosh, I forgot how old she is. I think that explains it all right there.
I was just going to add, James, you have to leave a little bit earlier.
Yep, I've got to step out at 11:30 here, so yep.
So I think now's the point we can feel free at this point to ask any of us questions, if anyone's got a burning one that they want to get us started off with.
Can I actually just volunteer, because I've actually been thinking about this a lot. So, and this is really, I think, for the dads out there, or people who know the dads. I think, because I spent a lot of time over the course of, I think, the pandemic, just kind of thinking back and a lot of introspection and retrospection, and I think especially for us dads, it can be hard to manage a kid who has behavior problems, right? And I think the thing that we tend to revert to often is, I'm in charge, do what I say, right? I still do that, and I know I'm not supposed to do that. So I have a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy for dads in this situation. But if it's one thing that I could say, and I think I've learned this a lot in the course of the past year, like, there's no battle that's worth winning that's going to damage your relationship with your son, right? Because you don't get that time back. And, you know, there's, I don't want this to sound overly negative or anything like that, but, you know, and think about it, there's a lot of times where, for me, the winning the battle and thinking that was going to suddenly turn on the light bulb and then he would suddenly get it and everything would be better and everything would be easy. You know, those battles were more important to me than they should have been. And in saying that, I also want to say to dads, like, in saying that, I'm not saying let the child do whatever he or she wants, right? I'm not saying that, oh, just, you know, let him run wild, let him, you know, don't have any sort of discipline or set any sort of boundaries or anything like that. But just remember, like, your relationship with them is far more important than kind of any battle that you have to win in the moment. So it's kind of a tangent, but I've been thinking about that a lot lately just because I think it's something that, looking back, I'm like, wow, man, there's a lot of things I should have done different, even though I knew I should have done them different. So. And
I'd just say that when we timetabled this session, selfishly, because it's to save James, because when I came to the conference the first time, I think I followed you out the room where we were about another 16 parents and we were asking you questions all around the building. We were trying to get away and everyone had their own story. So the idea was you learn the why from James. He's telling you why you might have dyscalculia or dyspraxia, but what I always found was missing was, well, what do I do with that information? So, right, you've told me it, and I understand it, but how do I take that home? And I think it's only through shared learned experiences. And you know, I've had the same thing. My wife says to me, you don't have to win the battle all the time, Gary. Just let it go. I've done the thing where we've stripped the bedroom of every toy, and it's been banned, and I think it's about 400 years time he gets his switch back. You know, we've done all that, and you know, we lived it, but it's really a chance for you guys to either say what for you, or you know, what's what, and you know, people further on, or you know, what do you retrospectively think, well, what could have done better? And as you say, it's difficult not to be that impulsive. I've got to win. I've got to prove my authority as dad. You've got to do what I say. But that's the idea of the session. So
yeah, and I think too, I think it's also underscored to me the fact that, like, oftentimes those battles were just about me venting my frustration, but using him as the target to vent my frustration. And I think it's underscored the importance too of, like, me being aware that, like, I have to take care of my own mental health. I have to make sure that I have, you know, outlets and hobbies and things that where I'm not becoming all consumed by, you know, kind of the winning the battles and sorts of things. So
I have a hand up, a couple of hands up. I think you both went. There we go.
Experience I had, not particularly. Tell me if I did the right thing. My 5-year-old was going absolutely loopy at the dining table, throwing everything off and going mad. So I just got up, picked him up, didn't hurt him, took him out of the situation and just talked quietly to him out of the room, and then brought him back in and sat down, and he was good as gold. And absolutely fine. What have I done? How have I reset his clock, or is that the right thing to do?
Can you come do that with me?
What triggered in him to calm down? Is it taking him away from the situation, or
I don't want to feel like I'm the one who's always giving all the answers. So I want other people to have a chance to respond.
I'd just say similarly, that kind of thing works for me as well. I think it's something about change of environment and maybe physical touch, something about that. I mean, small things that I do with my son is, for some reason, if he's a bit sort of, I feel like he's going to be a bit, I just put my hand on his head and he seems to like that. I don't know what it is. That slight physical touch, I think, can really help make particularly children feel safe. And I think sometimes I've reverted to, I mean, you know, I mainly have battles with my daughter, but that's because we're similar. But sometimes when I can't do anything, I've just learned now recently to just, even if they're like, if they're okay with it, just to have a hug. And that just seems to work as well. Something about the physical touch. I
thought just screaming and shouting, but
yeah.
but held myself.
I've actually had Cormac say to me, "I can't stop, help me." right? So he wants to come off that, right? He knows that he's going down this track, and we're winding each other up. We're having this battle, and he wants to stop, but he just can't. So he's not got this executive function to say, right, how do I get it? So one of the things we did, and it's the moving and changing environment. So one of the things we had in his bedroom, we used to have these little planets that were hanging down, and we used to say, right, okay, I would say, how many green planets are there? 1, 2, how many orange planets? 3, 4. And just that distraction, that ability to get him off that path, helping him off that path. And then once he was off, he was as relieved as I was, but he just couldn't get off it. And then from, I always learned from Cormac. I learned that I had dyslexia, again, from speaking to James. And then I learned I had ADHD from listening to James and seeing my son. And I'm the same. I get frustrated, and how do I get myself off that path? And so just taking them into a different setting, give them a safe, easy route out that you're both participating in. So you're both calming yourself down. And it could be reading a book, it could be looking at a picture, it could be whatever, what's your favourite food, whatever it may be that just lets them get off that path and then come back, and then come back a completely different person. Or you can have a stand-up battle for 20 minutes and throw things at each other. 40, yeah, and the next morning. So yeah, they're looking for that help to get calm as well.
I was going to say, I think it benefits both of you.
Yeah.
You're doing it because you're trying to solve the problem at the time, but actually by taking yourself as well, that buys you time, it buys you thinking time. And actually, I spend a lot of time watching in schools, and I work with families a lot. And I think, sometimes you see some of the worst teachers who are making a point, because I've gone in to have a look, and they're making a point, everybody stand up, right, that wasn't good enough. And I'm just thinking, why are you doing this? It's like a power struggle, and you know what, you're never going to win. So why don't you unpick what's going on? So I would do exactly what you've done. But then it's about, over a period of time, looking for what could have triggered that. And sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes you saying there's no ketchup is the final straw. It's nothing that you've actually done, it's just a build-up of things over the day. Does that make sense? But I think it benefits both of you. Lots of people use lots of strategies, but generally a change of something or a sensory input generally works.
I realised we had another question as well.
So we're trying different approaches as parents, but a source of our frustration is grandparents and their views on things, and they've got an opinion about everything, and they go through that power struggle, trying to discipline is the way forward. So, and sometimes we think, we just can't change their mindsets, we're just not going to bother. But every time that they look after the kids, we have that source of frustration with them. In your experience, what have you learned from that, and what advice can you give to us?
I hear you. I'm aware there's a camera on me. Hi, mother-in-law. Love you. I think, I don't know, I just learned very quickly. I used to get just so offended. I think a bit of advice I had a couple of weeks ago was, sometimes her daughter will just it doesn't hit me hard, but if she's frustrated, I know, because she'll come and give me a jab in the side, or it's really great. And I'm like, I have to say to her, what's happened? She said, don't let her do that. I just was like, ugh, and just didn't say anything. And I think I've just learned to be really strong in saying, this is how I parent, and this is how I choose to parent. And obviously, if my husband said, this is how we choose to go forward with it and with our children, and leave it at that, really. I think that's what I learned very early. Just don't. It used to really upset me, and really gets to you when you're like, how dare they, and they don't know, and I'm trying my hardest. And I think I just actually was like, I'm not saying to them, this is how we're doing things. That's
about the opposite. So grandparents want to be the spoilers, and I had to say, stop feeding them sugar, stop buying them Pepsi Max, stop buying them all this crap and then handing them back to me at 7 o'clock at night, because I cannot handle it, right? I've had a busy day, busy work, and you just let them do whatever they want, watch 4 hours of YouTube non-stop while feeding them caffeine and sugar, and then went, here you go, here they are, and you're like,
Lit the fuse, basically.
yeah, I'm like, whoa, right, and 2 hours, so completely opposite, but probably the same thing. I just said to my mum, stop it. And then I was like, you know that the boys tell when you've been doing it anyway, right? Because they don't lie. So I'm like, has my mum been feeding you the crap? Yes, right. And now she doesn't. So, I had to just sit her down and read the riot act and say, listen. But I know it's harder when it's a kind of more of this is a parenting style. But, another thing as well, if you, probably James has covered this before, but if you believe there's an underlying issue, whether it's ADHD or whatever, right, just make as much noise as you can. So I was saying to James before we started, right, it was only during lockdown when I was homeschooling and I was having to do this and work and do this, and I said, I wrote to everyone, pediatrics, neurologists, everyone, if you don't get this diagnosis, my marriage is breaking down, I'm going to kill my children, I'm going to burn the house, I'm going to leave the country. And I literally wrote that. And then they were like, oh yeah, you've been shouting about this for 8 years. And it was 8 years. So it is the most amazing thing if you have a child with ADHD and they get medication. It's just a light switch. Right? I said yesterday, sometimes you see the glimpse of that child, that beautiful child, where they're lovely and they're really, warm and they're not arguing, and you have it for about maybe 30 minutes before you go to bed, and you're like, God, I wish it was like this all the time. You can get that for 9 hours a day. It's amazing, right? So you really have to push for it. If you believe that there is an underlying cause, as James says, if there's any difficulties in anything, whether it's maths or reading or whatever, there's probably something to be investigated there. Just keep pushing for it. And I did when we did the COVID and we were doing it online, I did a little talk where when I was newly diagnosed, the label of Duchenne seemed like, well, why do I need anything else, right? It's so dramatic, so life-changing. It should explain everything. Everyone should know that there's cognitive or behavioural aspects. Why do I need to have an ADHD label or an autism label? But the schools, and this was clear, it's like once you get that label of something else, it's almost like a SWAT team burst into the school, and it's like, here's an iPad, here's a Chromebook, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And you're like, well, what changed? And the kid hasn't changed, but you've got this label, and then all of a sudden, all this springs into action. So I would say that if you're reticent to pursue it because, well, I'm still trying to deal with Duchenne as a diagnosis, it's hard enough to deal with that. It will make your life easier, and these other authorities they see it as a muscle condition and not a mental condition. So getting those labels early, and there's a backlog of 6 years to get diagnosed, but you get in there and start making noise.
Can I speak to that real quick? Because I think oftentimes grandparents, they think what's happening is because of a parenting problem. They think you're not being strict enough. They think you're being too complacent or whatever. Sometimes they think just because you're a bad parent. Sometimes they think because you feel sorry for them, that you're that sort of thing. But I think that it takes them a while to learn that that's not the case, and just through their own experience sometimes, because they've tried being a good parent and it doesn't work for them either, right? And so sometimes they eventually kind of get it, but sometimes too, being a little more dramatic in how you explain it to them can sometimes help. Like there's saying things like, he has brain damage. Are you trying to punish his brain damage? And that sounds like a very inflammatory, exaggerated way to say it, but in a certain sense, that's really true. And if you put it in the context of this is sort of like a disability, and you have to approach it differently, sometimes that can change the mindset, if that makes sense. But also saying, I've tried what you're trying, and it didn't work. But now I'm being strategic. I'm not just letting him do whatever he wants. I'm being strategic in how I'm approaching it. And you might see sometimes in that strategy where I'm not addressing it, but that's part of the bigger picture. And sometimes that helps too. And sometimes give them one thing they can do. Because if you hit them with too much information, it's like overload, right? But if you can say, if out of the list of 10 things, there's one thing at the top of the list that you think would make the biggest difference, just focus on that with them and say, hey, I really need your help. I really need you to help me out by just doing this. Just focus on that and kind of let some of the other stuff go or whatever. Does that kind of make sense too?
Can I just pick up from what you're saying, because often I hear the comment from a school perspective of these families are indulging this child, or they're letting them get away with blue murder. And actually I pick up that situation, whether that's with grandparents, we do grandparent sessions, we do family sessions, and we actually go the scientific route. Actually, this is what we see, and this is what, even with or without a diagnosis, because you're right, that could take 6-8 years depending where you are, but this is what we see, and behaviour is communication. No child is choosing to go down the path of your son and can't get out of that horrible rabbit hole, because it's not a nice feeling for them or you. And so we tend to go, this is what's happening to their brain, and this is what we know. And actually, just as you're saying, there's these 10 things we've been told to try, but actually we don't know which one we're working, so we're all going to do that. So it would really help if you do that and I do that. And I don't have a child with Duchenne's, but I use the word loosely, a child, because she's 20 now. But I had a child who was diagnosed at 4, so it's a similar journey to you, with a very, very rare life-threatening condition. And we still don't know the profile for her. Really, really rare. I can't meet other families like you can. We've just had to write our own journey. But you know, what would happen was she would rest for like a week before a family party, and she would be on the dance floor loving life. And then people would say, there's nothing wrong with her. I have no idea why you're in Great Ormond Street, Royal Brompton, under UCL, because it didn't make sense. But what they didn't see was the absolute 2 weeks of holding up and her not being in school, looking after her health. So I absolutely have walked your pathway, you know, and she has a rare condition, which means she has to eat 6,000 calories. So we would feed her sugar, because she'd be on the floor if she didn't, and people would be like, well, she's just had a packet of biscuits. I mean, she has just gone to uni, and the uni guys cannot understand she will have 3 pints of milk and a packet of dry digestives before she goes to bed, because she's this size, she's tiny. But I understand, and I absolutely understand the judgment and the isolation as well, because you go into that playground and you may have to do something different to get your child through those gates that day, and you can feel every family looking at you as if to say I would do it different, but they're not walking in your shoes. And hold your head up high, because you're walking your shoes. But I would use science, and on YouTube there's some really great short clips to explain things like ADHD and autism. 5 or 6 minutes, and they're very grandparent, mother-in-law accessible. I would use the science. You know, if asking isn't working, use the science.
Sorry, just it right there.
Yeah, I think just sort of linking on to the back of that, my frustration is more with school at the moment, because school are very much, well, we don't see that here, it must be your parenting. And it makes me want to bang my head against the wall, because there's so much involved with sort of masking and behaviours. And he's just started school, and they're kind of saying, well, it's really settled. And I'm like, well, he's really not, because he's holding it in all day, and at home, various things are happening. And I keep saying the same things, and they're not hearing me. And I just don't, I feel a bit kind of stuck at the moment, because, you know, they're like, well, try this parenting course. I'm like, I don't think the parenting course. I need you to just listen and try and help him express things in the day. But yeah, I just wondered whether anyone had any experiences like that, or whether there was sort of any advice as to what I could. I mean, I'm a teacher, and I know what I'd say if it was a parent in my class, but I can't seem to get it from a parent angle, the right sort of words.
One, come and have lunch with me. 2, we use a battery analogy with school, and we say, this is how much you've got. And most young people actually do want to be in school, and they do want to give things a go, generally, if you've got the setting right. But actually that takes, you know, by the time you pick them up, they're on 1%. And actually by the time you go through your front door, there is no percent left. And we use a range of strategies, and we maybe use videos, which is uncomfortable to video your son in a meltdown, but that sometimes makes them wake up. And it is about them putting things in place during the day to pace the day, to make sure that what's happening, it's not too inaccessible. And I actually really struggle with they've had a lovely day. And I always say to parents, you need to ask back, what does that look like? What does that mean? because you're obviously not having a lovely evening. Does that make sense? So we use a battery analogy and say, actually, well, it's great that he's had a great day, but that's used 100%. And actually, as he gets older, he's going to need percentage for family life, social, homework. So you're not giving me anything left. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think
batteries
as well,
tend to work.
They sort of say, he's had a lovely day, but after kind of the hour meltdown when we've got to do the job, is that my bottle broke and such did this, and someone drew on the wall, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And there's about 10 things that actually for him, those things are all, they're either different, or he doesn't understand why those things have happened. And I don't think schools they don't see that he takes all of that in and carries it home. And it's trying to get them to understand that too. Because I think they're sort of a bit like raising the phone. I'm like, yeah, but you can tell you what you did 6 weeks ago. His memory is very good. He can tell you, all sorts of random facts. And I think he tends to hold on to much more than what they appreciate.
If you're a teacher, have you heard of something called zones of regulation?
Yeah.
So what I would want for your son, if I was going in to see your son, zones of regulation, for those of you who don't know, it's a really simple system, and some schools use it throughout the whole school for everybody, so it's not a special thing, but they're like colour zones, like a red and a green and an amber, and it would be that regular check-in with him, because if his water bottle has broken, it's, in terms of his limbic system, that will just be simmering and building and building and building, and that's why you're getting the meltdown when you're coming home. And if there's a system to check in with him, where even if he can use colours to express what's going on for him, but it doesn't feel he has a voice till he gets home.
Yeah, because that's what he's saying, like, you know that you can tell him growing up at school, and he's like, I can't because I want to tell you. And I think it's that, and I know it takes time to build up relationships, and I feel that, I understand that and I appreciate, as a parent and as a teacher, but I want him to feel safe enough that he can. Like you say, it's obviously, he's not there yet, so yeah, that is really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just add something to that? I think you said about that recording thing, and I think really to record something, even to show to a doctor or somebody, and they probably don't quite believe that what's happening, because they never do it when you're sat in the hospital or the doctor, do they ever?
No.
So I think sometimes if you can get sort of some kind of evidence, because my son was diagnosed being autistic, and I've sort of been sort of reading, especially some of James's stuff, and I've been to some of his talks before, and nobody actually ever told me that the Duchenne and the autism, there was probably, because a lot of the Duchenne and the autism things, they're very similar, sort of the same sort of path and things, but some of the things, my son is completely not autistic. He never lined things up and done a lot of the stuff, and so I got stuck with this diagnosis, which severely sort of impacted on the rest of it. But nobody ever said that learning the thing could be from the Duchenne. It was always he's autistic. Even when he used to fall over and break things, knock his teeth out and all these things, it was because he's autistic. It was never that it's from the Duchenne. Nobody's ever explained, I never knew that for ages, that it was the dystrophin in the brain and everything, as well as in the muscles. So
I think there's also a sad fact that some schools are just shit, right? And it's a bit like MPs and everything else. So I've been blessed with an amazing head teacher at primary. I've got an amazing secondary school that are doing everything great. But even within the primary school, which was brilliant, we had a teacher who just said, oh, he's oppositional, I can't even give you our grade. And then I went absolutely batshit, right? And then things changed overnight. But even those that do go batshit, it still doesn't make a shit school better. So there is a sad fact that you might need the clear SWAT team to come in and spell out to them in professional terms saying you're just not doing your job right. And so there's only even if you give them all the evidence, even if you give them the brochures, even if you show them the videos, then depending on the size of the school and how many other kids have got needs and what the funding issues are, you might not have an ASN full time and all the rest of it. You could be one of many voices screaming at the head teacher saying you got to sort this mess out, and it's just a sad fact that some schools are better than others. I've been very, very lucky, and they've listened and things have changed. But the horror stories you hear, and my own sort of sister-in-law, her son's autistic, and she is just, there's lawyers involved and everything else. It's just terrible, and it's nothing to do with her and how much noise she's making. She is a squeaky wheel. She is showing them the evidence, but the school's just crap. And if you have that, then that's when you might have to speak to a clear or bring in a SEN lawyer and just present it and make them change, because you can't do it all, right? You get to a point, you've been banging your head against the wall for 10 weeks solid and nothing's changed, and it's not your fault, right? It just, you might have a crap head teacher, or the school just maxed and there's another 10 people also banging their heads against the wall. So don't feel that it's your fault, right? So you've got all these strategies and that's great, but you can't make them implement them. So sometimes you just got to realise that you might have to take another route.
So he has, I fought quite hard to get an EHCP, and I took the local authority to tribunal, and on the morning of the tribunal they rang me and granted the EHCP.
Yeah.
And then he has a one-to-one TA in the mornings, but then when it comes to the afternoon, that's when he finds it extremely hard. And rightly so, and the hard thing is as well, it's sort of like smoke screen and mirrors, because they look very supportive and they're doing the right things, but then they're saying things and I think, that's not really what I'm expecting on, it's taken me, I would probably say, I think we're on month 5 now, and I've essentially rewritten the EHCP targets because they were and I think as well, like the EHCP target, the EHL written, she was like, by the end of EYFS, then he has to be able to manage his own inclusion in the classroom. I was like, what? I don't think I can manage my own inclusion as an adult. So I had to kind of fight really hard on that, and I had some help from Victoria on the language that you want and don't want in the EHCP. So yeah, it's confusing to an extent because they appear supportive, like they're doing the right things, but clearly not appreciating all the things that go in the background. He's on the waiting list for ASD, but it's 2 years, and we're 4 months into it. We have a while to go, and yeah, it's just them sort of appreciating that it's not just Duchenne, as their words are. It's a whole other range of things, and they don't understand. Like when we go to a medical appointment, there's a lot of build-up, in the family before you go to an appointment, and you're there all day, and then you have to, go to work the next day, and you carry on. And so yeah, it was just kind of thank you, and I think it's just sort of that.
An EHC is only as good as the people who've written the advice for the EHC. I see some absolutely appalling EHCs. I had somebody who said, I saw one that wasn't thankfully from my authority, but said to have a 50% improvement in PE. And I'm like, how? If you can do that, come show me. But so you have to get the right people to do the advice, and that's the biggest challenge for families. But there's no reason that once you've got the EHC, I'm doing a session on EHC straight after here, but an EHC is only as good as the people who've written the thing, and actually it's such an old-fashioned view to think that Duchenne's is just a physical thing. And some people will say, well actually I've made the classroom accessible and I've got this, and they've got a TA, and I'll be like, and? What does that look like? What does that mean? Because having an adult isn't always the answer. Sometimes you have to have an adult, but it's what is that adult doing in that time? How is that work being simplified or differentiated or changed or made accessible? And actually having an adult alone, often they don't have the power to do that. And it can make or break a really good situation. So
just one thing linked to that, so often the TAs that are assigned to them as well have had no additional training, so they don't physically have the skills to manage the children. So like you said, just because you've got the person there doesn't mean it's meeting the children's needs.
no, I have 2 approaches in life. 90% of me is generally really nice, and I do understand most people's pathway and the way, the way you've walked and the journey you're on. But I get a head who tells me their provision's exceptional or amazing, and I'm like, okay, well show me then. What does that look like? And they'll be like, well, we've got a person, and I'm like, and? So we work right across the UK now. We weren't meant to, but the demand, people just kept finding my name, and I think it's charities like this that kept saying, go and talk to Claire, go and talk to Claire. So we can, because of the virtual world, we can pick up a local authority, we can pick up a school, and we can come in and model those conversations, which is horrible to have, but you know, I go in the nice route, and do you understand this is what this young person's dealing with, this is their experience, have you thought about mum or dad or whoever's caring for them? And sometimes they haven't, they focus so much on a child, and sometimes they go to a progress review, and it's almost like a crime sheet of what children can't do.
Yeah,
And you're
negatives,
like, can we just stop the meeting for a moment and just say, you know, what do you do outside school? Do you go horse riding? Do you go swimming? We often forget who that young person is, and it becomes a list of what problems they've got. And so part of the work I'm going to do in my next session is giving you a script when you go back into school, is to make sure the child that you had isn't forgotten, and it's not a whole crime sheet. There is a game, and there is a game where you, if you apply for an EHC and you've got an EHC, you do have to describe worst case scenario. You do have to do that. And that's why sometimes you end up with just loads of needs. And picking up your point, a diagnosis is only useful if the provision isn't in place. So if somebody understood your young man and had everything in place, you probably didn't need the diagnosis. But actually, if they don't understand it, then diagnoses are really helpful. Because like you said, another squad team will come in.
And feel free to use, like, if physios are happy to go into schools, well, at least mine is, they've been in the primaries and they've gone and talked about how they can adapt PE, you know, things that Claire's talking about, like accessibility, but also the physios are now more aware of the cognitive changes as well, so not just in there. OTs as well, get them in there as well, and you'll find it, again, it all comes down to personnel, so if they're shit, they're shit. But if they're any good, they're willing to learn, right? And so my physio has just been into the secondary school. They had an in-service day. They took up 2 hours. All the teaching staff, the PE staff, all sat there while the OT and the physio explained Duchenne to them. And it's not their first Duchenne child. But it was like, right, well, we haven't had one go through for about 2 years. We'll do it all again. We'll make sure everyone's refreshed. So they're willing to make those accommodations. Now, if they're not, then you can scream at them. But, you know, you can push those people in and say, listen, there's any chance you can come in, do an hour on. So it's not just me being the annoying parent. We've got someone there who's got the qualification, and they're seen, you know, in a different light, and they can come in and give that advice. And certainly for the support staff that Cormac's had, they've always been really open to that. And if the support staff have changed, there's obviously been a bit of a handover, but then we'll bring in the physio or the OT again and bring them up to speed.
I see we have a hand, hand raised here.
Just wondering if you guys could give me a couple of silver bullets would be really, really useful. So there's an 18-year-old lad that we're looking after, and he's getting really, really despaired, really, really depressed. About the futility of going through college and all of the stress that comes along with that, because he has Duchenne's and it's a life-threatening condition. What's the point? Why am I even doing this? So just a couple of phrases that would just be able to put him right back on the track would be great.
Well, I was speaking to PTC, so they've hired a guy with Duchenne's to help with the transition project. And if you speak to Joanna, right, she was telling me, and with the guy there, when he first came in and they hired him in, and he was like, you know, head down. I can't remember his name, I'm terrible names, right? So it's like, I'm David, I've got Duchenne, and that's how he framed himself. And now they've given him actual work and purpose, and he actually sees value in himself. And he's got a reason to be doing stuff, and he seems that he understands that he's valued. And he's saying it's a completely different person that comes into the room now. Duchenne is a kind of secondary that gets mentioned afterward. He's actually there as to contribute. He's a valued member of staff. He feels that he's got an impact and he's got a voice. And because of that, he's just, you know, he's full of himself. He's sitting up. He's not subservient to everyone else. He feels he's there, and then he might mention later on he's got Duchenne, yet he's in a power chair and everyone can see it. So I think it's all about having that, you know, what's the purpose. So it's not you're just at college because, well, you finish school, then it's something to do. It's that, you know, why am I going to college? What benefit? What am I going to do? Why am I going to be? And I was speaking to a guy at the table last night, and he's just gone to Nottingham Trent University. He's looking at doing what's he doing? Product design, and he's saying, right, I can see that all these products don't work for me. I'm going to actually make a difference. I'm going to design products for medical and for a living that are going to work for me and my peers. And he's really full of himself, but he's got that purpose, he's got that drive. And I think if you don't have that, if you feel that you're just in college because, well, I finished school and there's something to do, right? And then, it's just, you're just kicking me out of the house, then yeah, you're going to feel despondent and shitty. So you've got to, I think it's just, I don't know, how do you instill that self-belief? How do you make him feel that he's got that purpose? And it could be through sport, it could be through, power chair football or whatever it may be. He needs to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, not just because he's been told he's got to go to college.
I think there's power as well. There's, if you speak to Ravi, engagement project support coordinator, he's been working with a lot of young men going through that transition from child services to adult services, so 18 is a perfect age. Having them start on this, they did some online sessions. It was called Yes I Can. They had about 12. They had the final one this week. And they got together on kind of Zoom and had a speaker about kind of what they'd done, whether that was going to university, accessible travel, sex and relationships, all these kind of things. And they held those sessions. And I think by the end of it, they also went on a residential. They ran 2, so they went away and kind of met each other. And by the end of that, I think they had a few very similar young men join them for that were kind of very in that similar mindset that by the end of it could see, well, if they can do this, then I can do that. And we've got many of them here at the conference this weekend.
So is that going to be running again? So
I hope
so.
I hope so. We hope. Yeah, it's been.
I think so. I think the aim is to get the funding to do it again, and also and to expand it geographically as well, because obviously a lot of people are down south, and therefore how do we do this in Wales, how do we do it in Scotland, how do we do it in and that representation, if you can't see it, you can't be it kind of thing. It's difficult with the boys. If the small cliques, they're small game cliques, but they're dispersed. So seeing that there's a network out there, and these guys are doing it, and they can. It's difficult to force people in. You're going to get this peer support group. I don't know who they are, right? Let's have forced fun. But so it's difficult, right? But if they can see it, then they can aspire to it, and they can see there's worth in it. And I think that's. I mean, I'm not qualified because my son's 12, right? So I'm not at that stage. But I know from speaking to people and being here that when they go through their teens, they can be more isolated. So I see autism as being a bit of a superpower for Cormac because the world revolves around him. So he doesn't care that his kids, everyone else off on the mountain bikes. But those that don't have that see their peer support group all going off and playing football or doing rugby, and they feel more and more isolated. They get more and more depressed, and especially if their puberty is delayed as well, then it compounds it, and by the time they get to 18, they think that no one loves me, I'll eat worms. So that I don't know. It's really how do you force them to see that there is more out there, and it is difficult, but giving them a purpose beyond just going to college because it's presenteeism, I would recommend.
Yeah. Can I just say, my son's 19 now, and he's just going through transition. He left school, he's been going to a special school all his life, and he just left. And I was a bit worried that obviously 15 years in the same school, I mean he didn't even change schools to go to secondary, it was the same place. And back going to college, and you can get a place where if you've got special needs where we live, college is 3 days a week. So that leaves you still with 4 days. I don't even sit at home on his tablet all day just looking at YouTube. He likes to learn, and he's like a little sponge, and he can tell you every country in the world, every capital city, every flag. He knows everything about that sort of stuff. And I needed him, and the only college course, there were two different courses, a life skills course, which he's done all that at school, and he'll be bored because he's done that, and the other one is an employability course, and basically this is in the special needs college as well, and I'm thinking, well, fine doing an employability, but what's he ever gonna, when he leaves college, what's he gonna do with this employability? Is he ever gonna get a job? And but it was the only way I could get him to keep going into education he's got to go on this course, and if he proves that he's making progress, he can stay maybe another year, and if he doesn't, he's got to leave. So it's a bit of a thing, you know, what do you do when he leaves college? What is, if you can't get a job, what's he going to do? So we decided the other couple of days in the week that he wasn't at college, we sent him to a day centre. And trying to find a day centre where we are that does personal care, nobody really wants to do that. They just want you to go in and be able to take yourself to the toilet and everything. And we found somewhere, we had about a choice of 3 places, and he didn't like, one was too far away really to go every day. The other one, he didn't like it because it wasn't just for young adults, it was for people that had strokes, and probably anywhere up to 70-year-old, it was all a thing. And we found somewhere now, it's took a long time, probably since August, and he's just getting to like it. But they don't talk, a lot of them, they're not as capable as him, they don't talk. So it's nobody, there's nobody to talk to. Well, it doesn't normally stop him because he can normally just talk, and anybody that's there, he'll just talk and talk. So it's quite hard just to.
So I don't know if anyone knows Elizabeth Froome, who's the chair of the World Duchenne Organisation, but her son Eustace, who's in his early 20s, is an amazing graphic designer, right? And I work in IT. And I always joke that the spectrum in IT is very, very large, right? So I would be like pushing the boundaries on the spectrum with my sort of ADHD, but where I work, I'm right in the middle, right? So it's all ends of the spectrum, and the people thrive in that industry because of that. So the best programmers in the world have all got Asperger's and autism, right? These guys are earning $300,000 to $100,000 to $500,000 a year. They've got agents. Right, like footballers, they're that highly. Google and Amazon or whatever are chasing after these people. Right, they might not be able to be good company in the party, but they're absolutely amazing at what they do. And so there are jobs and there are roles, and there might not be any tech, right? Fine, but most of them are in gaming, and there's nothing to stop you doing that. It's a completely accessible industry. You can program, you can design in there. So trying to push them at those skills, I mean, my kids love Scratch, which is like a computing thing you can do on your computer and whatever. Really, really easy kind of programming tool, which is more like flow charts rather than actually writing lines of code. But a lot of the coding that we do at work now is low code, which is you don't actually write code anymore. You just drag icons and things just magically work. So there's a massive industry for people like this. So you're not having to, go into an office. I don't go into an office. Before COVID, I didn't even go into an office. I work from my kitchen or my bedroom, and I earn a really good salary doing that. And so there are opportunities there. So pushing people, nudging them to say, you can still do this job, and you can still be productive, and you can still earn more money than your parents. Doing this is another way of giving them a kind of a pipeline, and you'll be able to, especially for Cormac, you're saying you're autistic, and he's like, well, what's that really mean? Does that mean I'm like this guy? I'm like, no, your autism is you express it slightly differently to that whatever. But here's this guy here who's earning £500,000 and he's designing computer games, and it's like, well, tick tick tick. What's your number one job? YouTuber seems to be the thing, and then after that, a game designer. Well, there you go. You can do that, right? And you're not bullshit. You're not like, yes, son, you can be a fireman. No, you can actually do this. So
I think is quite good as well.
Yeah.
Some of the guys are here, so they're focused on the older people with Duchenne.
Yeah.
They've got some really good sort of advice about fatigue levels and things at work.
I think
careers and things.
I always recommend them. They're a really good group to go and talk to.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be young again, and
They're in there. They've got their T-shirts on today, so
Yeah,
it's quite clearly. It's clear who they are. They're really, really great.
Changed their remit, haven't they?
Yeah.
Because they've got young people with other neurological.
Yeah, so they've gone.
Yeah.
They've gone for the full neuromuscular, but it's the same ideas. They're campaigning for the same stuff. Inclusion in jobs, but then how do we holiday? How do we travel? All the stuff that that may feel that young adult might feel, well, I'm kind of trapped in the house. How do it's like, how do you get?
It's more that he's not been able to see beyond the futility.
Yeah.
This is a life-limiting condition.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly.
That's quite good for them because they've got 40, 50
Yeah.
in that group.
And some of these guys have had work experience with like Microsoft and others, or PTC, etc. So there are opportunities out there, but obviously they're not going to land on your lap. But like normal, everywhere else, no one's just going to hand you a job. You got to push for it. So but at least if you can see it, you can do it.
Yeah, you get inspiration.
Yeah.
My advice for him would be the same as the advice for the lady over there. I rarely give the same advice for an 18 or a 14-year-old is, who are you? What do you like? Start there.
Yeah.
Literally start there. So I have young men, I've had, I work in a particularly ethnic heavy group, and the families want everybody to be a doctor and a dentist, and that's just the pressure. And by year 9 they're like, Claire, can you just have a word with my dad, because I can't do this, I can't. And I would say, number 1, who are you and what do you enjoy, what do you like, because that's how we all choose hopefully the job we've got. Number 2, it's not a race. So lots of my students I pull out of school at 14, 15, 16 and put them in college, because they can do 3 days a week, and it spreads their week out and it paces it. However, what I won't let them agree to, because you go and look around college and they say exactly what your son got offered, and I'm like, but they're interested in Photoshop, or they're interested in coding, or whatever. I need them in those lessons so they can learn. I don't want to do they don't need life skills. Yeah. They don't want to do this. So there's sometimes quite a dialogue about making sure they can have access to the right course. And actually most of it is around personal care.
Yeah.
Well, they can go, but what would happen if they needed the loo? Well, we can work that out. So I've just got 2 young men that took 4 years to do A-levels, because they did a sort of BTEC route, and they've both started university this year. No, one's 2 years in, one's 1 year in. So it's not a race. You can go and study something at 21. It's not a race. And actually one's doing graphic design and doing really well, and then the other one's doing media and editing and sort of photo editing, and actually has his own business. And again, both those young men, even though they're not part of the Duchenne network, would definitely buddy up. They're quite unassuming young men, but they're very much like, I finally found my way. The tricky years for most of my students tend to be between year 9 and year 11, when other people are choosing and schools are putting pressure on about grades and you've got to be this by this time. It's not a race. You can go at any time. You can learn anything at any time. But maybe it's unpicking the pressure with that young man as well.
Just got a hand raised. Thank you.
So the challenge we're facing, sometimes it feels like we're the only ones. So apologies for saying that. But so at school we've got the whole EHCP plan, but school is making efforts to put those in place. But my son here, he doesn't always allow it to happen. Anything that's related to disability, he's not happy with it. It's like 2 worlds for him. So he's not too happy about me talking about it. And so like for example, then he would have a support teacher, he would have a SEN person who will speak to the parents a lot. If that SEN person gets anywhere close to him, he's freaking out. It just breaks. It basically just loses the plot. And so how do you challenge that at school? So what do you do? Do you try and make changes to allow him to be normal? Because if he's doing things that are normal, because he's going to a school, state school, where there are a lot of children who are disabled as well. So it's a pretty good school. They've got children who are disabled, and they've got children who are able, and he wants to be more like them. So anything that is done differently for him, he doesn't really. He wants to stay away from it. And if it comes close to him, he'll freak out, and he'll just play out, and he'll be rude towards the teachers, the SLA, and everything. We found that so just one more thing, on that one, he needs to use his wheelchair, and for health and safety, the school want him to use his wheelchair as well. But when he's not using his wheelchair, he's probably in his best behaviour. But the challenge is how do you balance that so that he's safe as well as being able to be happy at school.
Yes. So just unpicking your question, it's horrible to hear that you feel isolated, and that's often the parents' experience. Your son's views are really common for myself, and I think what happens is I would always start with listening to your son. He's telling you what he wants, And then that's a dialogue that you need to have with school. And it's obviously an inclusive school, and maybe other things work for other children, but your son's saying, I want things that look like other people's provision. So, you know, sometimes I go in and there's a PE lesson and I say, well, what's that child doing? And they say, well, they've got the stopwatch or they're filming with their iPad. And I'm like, well, nobody's going to want to do that. Maybe once, but not every lesson. So it's about having the conversation with school about what your son needs, but what's attracted to everybody else. So your son might have to do something, but so does 25 other children want to do, that it's not just something for him. So
sometimes I feel like that we have to break the rules, but the school's not willing to break that rule. Because it's like the whole walking thing. I just think that for his mental health, it's better probably that if we allow him to walk and just get on, then if he did have the fall, then deal with it during that moment. I know that could be dangerous as well.
So what age is your son?
12.
12, right. So it's exactly the same age as Cormac, right? So we did exactly the same thing. Physio went into school, suggested, because he's in secondary school, he's now going to different classes, and they said, you know, it makes sense to go get pushed in the chair when we're getting a power chair coming in between classes. And Cormac was like, no, I don't want to do that, I want to walk, right? And then we were saying, and then we actually said to Cormac, but you do realise if you fall over, because you've got these people who are like 6'2", 6 years, you know, running around the corridor, if you get smashed and fall over and you break your leg, you might never walk again.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? And we just told him that. And he was like, all right, that makes sense. And he's like, okay, as long as I can walk in the class. I'm like, yeah, of course you can. Just put the chair outside. It's like, okay, right?
So they get that position.
Yeah, but you will get that. But then if you keep falling over and or it's taking too long to get to class, and you're saying, well, we kept on getting these alerts saying Cormac's not met. He's skipped this class, and like, no, he's taking 10 minutes to get from one room to the other. But eventually, I think we sat down and had that conversation. And if they say no, I want to walk, then let them walk. Right? Because you've got to be guided by them. And you know, and the physio might turn around and say, oh, you could get a long bone fracture and it could be terrible. Yeah, you could, but that could happen in the house or it could happen in the park, or, you know. But you don't make your life hell around it. You know, I think you've got to tell them, right, this is going to make my son happy. And eventually he might turn around and say, well, you know what, this is getting a bit much, I'm getting a bit tired, maybe I will take the wheelchair. But I think if you make it a competition or an argument, then he's more likely to be stubborn about it. So
last year they agreed to him walking, and you know, he was alright, and he was actually happy when he was walking.
Yeah.
He was able to hang around with his friends. When he's on his wheelchair, he feels as though he can't hang around with people because they will treat him differently.
Yeah, but then he should be in a power chair. Is he in a power chair?
He's on a power chair
yeah.
at school, yeah. Yeah. So again, with that, he has to have one for school, one for home.
Yeah.
He can't have the same thing at home. But yeah, it's just it's just that I'm getting the school to agree.
And maybe there's a compromise. Maybe there's one lesson a day where he can leave 5 minutes early,
Yeah,
where the
that's what
corridors
we
are
do.
empty, maybe on the way to lunch, and then that's the time he has to walk. You know, maybe there's always a compromise, and it's a
Yeah,
compromise.
it's things like that we find difficult to compromise with Yusuf because he's not allowing us to set those
I mean,
compromises.
I'm just looking at my colleague who's just walked in the room, so everybody's looking at Alison now. So, but we do have this a lot, and we also work with students who have brittle bones, and they're like that.
This is one of mine.
Oh.
Oh, okay, me, Dad. But we do have that challenge where we have students with brittle bones where they have horrendous fractures. You know, they're out of school for a year and they come back and go, but I am walking, I'm going to walk. And it's about saying, this is what we're going to do for this transition once a day, but if you follow the rules and you walk safely, because also now I know who your son is, I know your son. And also, you know, what we need to be doing is saying to him, this is a two-way process. If you walk safely in that one time, then we can build up. But if you disappear and go in different corridors and we can't find you, that's scary for the staff because we don't know you're safe. Does that make sense? So it's about.
It does make sense. Yeah.
It's a two-way process.
Physio, so do you have a physio that goes into school?
It's been a bit bad because we moved only 2 years ago.
Right.
And just getting the services restarted and everything, it's just been quite difficult. They're supposed to be going, but they've not been going.
Because again, you're right, you can have that conversation with them about.
So he had one last year, they came, they haven't come this
Okay.
year.
That's, yeah, that's
But,
right.
yeah.
Because they, as a health professional, you can go in and say, yeah, exactly the same
Yeah.
thing, like once a day.
Yeah.
It'd be really useful for you to walk to that lesson when the corridor's quieter or whatever. You've got.
I mean, school's been very supportive, and this is why I find it difficult to try and, always go against the school, because they do advise him, you can leave earlier. They'll even get the whole class out to help him find a seat that's suitable for him.
Yeah.
But sometimes he just doesn't allow it. And how do you convince your child to accept sometimes some of those things?
Well, I think you also have to say that every other child has to comply with the rules of the school. You can't, to some extent, they're rules for everybody's sake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just getting them to agree.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is the biggest challenge. It's not always getting the school to do it.
It's him.
The child to agree as well.
Yeah.
But no, thank you.
And I think that we talked about this yesterday with David, is that they're still normal children, right? So if you had a non-disabled child, would you make the same adaptations? So would you say, oh well, you don't like that, I'll bend the rules? No, you wouldn't. You would say, oh, tough shit, suck it up, right? So you sometimes a bit of tough love, and they have to accept that. Oh, there's the rules, right? And you just live with it. So it's a bit like we were saying yesterday. My son goes, oh, I don't want to pick up the Lego. I find it difficult to get up and down the floor. Well, tough. You made the mess. You sort it out, right? If I go around and sweep up after him, then his other brother is going to be like, well, wait now, you don't do that for me, right? So why should they be treated differently? So I think there's making reasonable adaptations. And then there's being a parent and saying, no, them's the rules. And all the way through life, you're going to have rules you don't like when you go to work, and you're going to have to do stuff you don't like. It's kind of eat your vegetables. So you got to eat your vegetables, and that's non-negotiable. Sorry. So,
I think the thing is though, we wanted our son to walk as long as possible, and at school he had like a walking thing with wheels on, and he would do that, and then he sort of grew out of that, and they kept saying, oh, can he go in and knock his chair because he's getting tired? And then there's times when he wasn't in his chair, there'd be no indication, he would just fall over when they were out somewhere, and normally, he would trip over a speck of dust, there'd be nothing there and he fell over. And it was just that thing that getting a phone call, we're in A&E, can you come, when you're at work, and you just have to rush off. And in the end, he did have to go in his chair because I wasn't happy that I was going to get a phone call and say he's broke his leg, he's done this, he's done that. He just so he was hurting himself on a more regular basis, and we did have to give in and
But
go.
would you say allow it until you get to that sort of situation? Try and prevent it before, so preempt it and prevent it before.
But then you want them to walk as long as they can.
That's
You want
right.
But you
them
can
to
do that.
walk.
You can do that at home. You have to remember that if you've got a T or an ASN at school, right, and your kid falls, and they're 12-year-old, they're heavy, and the sad fact is they'll get taught, right. You could maybe try and break their fall, but if they're going down, you've got to let them go down because you could get injured. And so like if you're at home and you see your kid, you'll dive and do a rugby tackle and you'll take the weight, but they're not going to do that, right? So there's a bit that if they fall down and they hurt themselves, they're more likely to have that long bone fracture at school than they are at home when there's someone around there who's going to catch the body weight. So you can't just say, well, I'll allow you to do it until you break your bone, and then I can say, I told you so, right? So you gotta. If it comes to a point there's a health and safety reason that you've got that 5 minutes before lunch or before break where we're going to let you walk out, because that's great that you can stay on your body weight if you can. It's good for your bones, all the rest of it. But if it's too much of an inconvenience for the rest of the day, you're going to have to just go in your chair. And if you want to run around, you can do it in the garden, you can do it in the play park, you can do it at home under your guidance and supervision. But it's a bit unfair to say to the TA, you've got to walk next to this person, and if they go down, you've got to catch them. If they're,
He accused the school of trying to make him weaker. They're preventing him from walking.
Yeah.
It comes up with some smart stuff like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's unbelievable, but
Yeah.
I appreciate
So you can
that.
still do some upper body exercises, and we had, who was it yesterday who was doing boxing?
Yeah, we had someone whose child was doing
I
boxing,
think it was
and it
Harry,
was
wasn't it?
wheelchair
Was it
boxing,
Harry?
wasn't
Yeah.
he? I think so, possibly.
Yeah,
I'm just aware it's 1 minute past 12, and I know we're due a break now, and obviously we've got the next session with Claire, I think, at, I should really write these down, and I have somewhere, but it's 1:15, so yeah, I think it's been a busy session, but I was just one final comment is that I think that's something very common for this age group, that kind of 10 to 12, who maybe have experienced in primary school being able to walk everywhere because the sites are smaller. Moving to secondary school, we know secondary schools are bigger, and then it comes at often the exact time that our children are using their wheelchairs more, and how tough that must be to go from, in this situation I was able to walk, but now I can't join my friends. It just must be, I think when we put ourselves in those shoes, it must be so incredibly hard, and I totally get the fieriness of them around it. I get it. I think there's a lot going on, but I think, yeah, strong children with strong minds. But yeah, I want everyone to go and hopefully have a coffee, comfort break, look after yourselves because it's not long till the next session. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone.